This is Brian May.
Hi, and I'm Roger Taylor. We're from Queen.
And we're in the studio with Redbeard, of course.
And this is The Game.
On its 30th anniversary, Queen drummer Roger Taylor remembers the period when Queen toured constantly, stopping only long enough to record another album. Brian May follows Roger Taylor.
It was an exhausting time. I remember, I think we actually sort of really almost burned out. It was almost overworked, but it was great to look back on it, But I think our creative flow suffered a little over that period. Of course, we were working so hard, but,
I think at times we were a bit inefficient. I can remember labouring over that Live Killers album and mixing it ourselves, and we recorded countless concerts.
Yeah.
And we insisted on going through every performance and listening to them all and picking them all up. I think we should have just said to someone, hey, mix us a live album. It would
Absolutely.
have been much easier.
And I don't think it actually turned out.
It wasn't that great.
Anywhere near as well as it could have done to us.
That's right.
Yeah.
The Game had an overall sparse and rhythmic sound compared to previous Queen albums, and Brian May said the change was a conscious one.
It's unusual for us to actually put a direction into the albums. It usually just happens naturally, but we did try and put this in, yeah. We thought it's time that we did a bit of rhythmic stuff and left a few more open spaces, which is what we've done, really. Usually our stuff is very heavily layered, a lot of counterpoint and a lot of background harmonies and all kinds of stuff. But this one is pretty open most of the time. You have 2 or 3 instruments going at one time and that's all, which makes a big difference. The first day of the studio we sit and play each other what we have and talk about directions we could take. And maybe we'll play around with them and see what can be done as far as instrumentation. And then the one person who wrote the song will generally go away and complete it, and complete the arrangement and bring it back, and we will start playing it then. It changes a little bit after that again, during the overdub stage and everything, if there are overdubs. But always it's the composer who has the last say, and he writes the words and the final version of the melody, and the composer does the mix as well.
Queen guitarist Brian May talks about the song Save Me from The Game.
I wrote it about a friend, someone who was going through a bad time, and I imagined myself in their shoes kind of telling the story. That's what it is, someone whose relationship has totally f***ed up, and how sad that person was. I don't suppose you can print that. We wrote very separately in those days.
Yeah.
And we never really talked about what the songs meant as well. I think we were quite shy about what we were trying to say individually in the songs. We tend to talk about things more now.
Yeah, very much more now.
That's right.
We'd be playing on a record and we had no idea what it meant.
That's right.
Actually, that's strange that the first time I heard Brian play ever, I remember I was very particularly impressed with the sort of touch and tone, which was a sort of had a musicality I hadn't heard before. Mm-hmm. It's a sort of its touch is part of the sort of tone, isn't it? It's a sort of vibrato thing. It's very, very musical, very melodic style of playing Brian has, I think.
It's funny that my recollection is the same of Roger, really. First hearing him tune up his snare. I'd never seen anybody tune a drum before. The drummers I knew just sort of played it the way it came from the shop, I think.
It's random, you hit it.
So Roger was doing these very very musical rolls on the snare, just before he touched anything else. And I remember thinking, that's, I hadn't heard that kind of thing before. It's strange, we both have the same memories of that. Yes, I think as a band we're very aware of sound. You can make great, wonderful records, and build in all sorts of arrangements and everything. But if it doesn't sound nice, nobody wants to listen to it. I think it's something which isn't talked about very much these days. The sound quality is vital.
Closer to skiffle than Bohemian Rhapsody, that's the simple but effective approach that Queen had used much earlier on their third album, Sheer Heart Attack, with the song Killer Queen. Still to come, Brian May and Roger Taylor of Queen recall the view from the summit as the Game album goes to #1 everywhere. For this and your other favorite rock star interviews, be sure to visit inthestudio.net. I'm Redbeard, in the studio with Brian May and Roger Taylor of Queen for the 30th anniversary of the #1 seller, The Game.
This is Brian May.
Hi, and I'm Roger Taylor. We're from Queen.
And we're in the studio with Redbeard, of course.
And this is The Game.
On its 30th anniversary. By the time The Game came out, almost 6 months after Crazy Little Thing Called Love had gone to #1, The album received a royal reception. Here's Queen guitar player Brian May.
Yes, I always thought there was an instant when we were the biggest thing in the world. There was about 3 seconds where we were the biggest group in the world. You know, but Another One Bites the Dust sort of clinched it because it suddenly crossed over to the R&B market, and suddenly, instead of 1 million albums, we were at 3 or 4 million albums or whatever it was. And at that time, that was about as much as anyone had ever done. It was big. This is before the days of Thriller.
Yeah.
Where things got totally out of hand, you know, and Def Leppard, I mean, really.
That's obscene, yeah. Come on.
But it was big, yeah. So I don't think we realised we would ever, things would ever be any different, did we? I think we were kind of spoilt by that point.
It may surprise you to know that the worldwide #1 hit, Another One Bites the Dust, was so simple and so rhythmic that no one in the Queen camp even remotely considered releasing it as a single. But an off-the-wall suggestion from another performer in L.A. who knew a thing or two about hit songs made Queen drummer Roger Taylor and guitarist Brian May reconsider.
We were playing the Forum, I remember the first time I heard it suggested, and Michael Jackson was in our dressing room, and he suggested it. He said, I love that cut. You guys are mad if you don't release that. And that was the first, and I thought he was mad to suggest it. I never thought it would be a hit.
It's a seldom heard tape recording of Michael Jackson you just heard there.
Yeah.
Very rare piece of tape. I know the reason it was put out in the end was that the record company were really forced to do it because some DJs in New York City picked it up on some of the black stations and just kept on and on playing it, and eventually the record company just had to put the thing out, didn't they? That's what happened in the end. And people apparently thought that we were a black group at that time. Well, some of them did. That's what I'm told anyway, and they were kind of upset to find out that we were sort of pinkish.
On their way to selling over 300 million units worldwide, second only to the Beatles in the UK, Queen's members exhibited surprising loyalty and restraint by not developing solo careers. Queen drummer Roger Taylor explains.
I don't know what I'd put it down to. I think we just realised that's what we do best, and that we're strong together, and that the whole is more than the sum of the parts, you know. And I think, you know, that's overrides any sort of ego considerations, and you know, I think it's quite important to stick together. We've had our ups and downs, you know. Obviously, you do, and I think any sort of creative partnership is going to have ups and downs and difficult moments. But you have to either swallow your pride sometimes or give a bit here and there to make it work, and that's just part of being a group, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. It helps to recognise that each person in the partnership needs to have an equal voice as well. Very important. You know, in many groups, perhaps one or two of the guys will have the creative power to submerge the other two, but that's not happened with us. We all write, and we all have very strong feelings about how everything should be done.
One of the most memorable performances of the 1985 Live Aid benefit concert from the massive Wembley Stadium in London was that of Queen, seen by more than 1 billion viewers worldwide. Yet, by November 1991, it was revealed that lead singer Freddie Mercury had AIDS. He died from complications the next day, effectively ending the original band's reign on rock's throne. In the mid-90s, Queen lead guitarist, songwriter, occasional singer Brian May embarked on a solo career, but he found the going surprisingly tough outside of the rock royal family of Queen.
It's kind of this reconstruction process. It was survival for me. You know, I existed that way, and I kind of drifted through life, and I had a certain amount of ambition, I'm sure, but basically I was very airy-fairy about it, you know. I think I'd been lucky, you know, and I always had this great belief that sort of talent will out and stuff, and you just get on with your own things and people will discover you, you know.
And is that maybe a tad naive, even for a veteran like you?
I think it was extremely naive, and I think a lot of the reason that Queen succeeded was that there were other ingredients in there, you see. We were a four-piece, and everybody had their area, you know, and one of the most important areas was this business of getting across, you know, the bridge between music for music's sake and the art and the listener and the audience. And really that's what Freddie did, you know. Freddie was the consummate purveyor, and I don't think he would be at all insulted by me saying that, you know. he was great at getting things across. And he said, what's the point of making music in a vacuum? I want people to hear my music. You know, and that's the way I am. You know, I was lucky to have Freddie all those years who performed that function. He's not there now, and I have no desire to live in the past whatsoever. So I said to myself, if I have a career in the future, I have to take hold of it in my own two hands. That's the only way it's going to happen. And it just happened that life had led me to that conclusion anyway. You know, I mean, we talked about this a while ago, you know, but I'd been through kind of losing a parent, losing the group, losing my marriage, losing my kids, all this sort of stuff, you know, without wishing to go into details. And to get through all that kind of stuff, you have to kind of get hold of yourself and say, right, if I'm going to survive, if I'm not going to jump off the bridge, I'm going to be my own person. I'm going to take hold of my life and put it where I think it should be.
But in